Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is June 29th today, Saturday, and I'm sitting down to record an overview of the astrology for July. So I'm really excited to be here right now at the Great Lakes Astrology Conference in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I've been having a very nice time at the conference. I've taught a few classes over the past few days, and I'm in my hotel room currently, so it's kind of I feel the hotel room. Let's see if some kind of painting up there. You probably can't see it very well. Obligatory hotel room art. At any rate, so I'm going to dive into the astrology of July today, but I wanted to start today's video by sharing a personal story. Because occasionally astrology interrupts our lives, especially as astrologers or students of astrology or people who pay attention to the transits. Even though you have a sense of what's coming, even though we study the planetary transits, and as astrologers, more than anybody, we really know where they are all the time, where they're moving through the zodiac and how they're connecting and what it might bring. And we think about it more than probably anyone else on the planet. You know, we're unique that we think about this kind of stuff all the time. And for many of us, there comes a moment where the transit that you've been thinking about for maybe years, suddenly it's happening. It happens through a series of events or circumstances that you couldn't have anticipated. Even though as they're happening, you're saying, so that's what this transit is all about. Now I finally know. And it fits perfectly within maybe some of the symbolic parameters that you've been thinking about for a long time. But suddenly there you are and you're living it. It's a very, very strange and beautiful experience. For example, you may live a long time, between major astrological transits in your chart. It's not every day, for example, that Pluto will square your sun and your moon, or that Neptune will conjoin your natal Venus, or something like that. So sometimes, as an astrologer, you say, 3 years from now, I'm going to get a big Pluto transit, or I'm going to, so sometimes we live for a very long time waiting. And then when it happens, it's like, oh my God, this thing really was destined to happen. And you see the symbolism, it fits with what you've been thinking about, but you're still your mind is blown. So that's a unique thing, because most people on our planet, frankly, live every event of their lives, whether it's unexpected or not, whether you get a promotion unexpectedly or you earn it and you have a pretty good idea you're going to get it. Either way, most people live through all of the events of life, expected or unexpected, without any sense that there is an eternal spiritual sense of order behind all of the events, guiding the events, shaping the flow of events. So mostly people don't live with a close relationship to that truth. But as astrologers, we do. And one of the things that it gives us is the ability to work into the deeper meaning of the events and experiences, because we have the standpoint of destiny along with us. Now, I'm saying this because I just had an event here at the conference that was definitely one of these kinds of experiences. So I got here on Thursday and I stayed up late talking with two of my students. We stayed up pretty late, till about midnight. And we're talking astrology, under the stars, sitting outside of the hotel. And the conversation was very deep, and it had to do with fate. It had to do with how much of our destiny is controlled or not. And it also had to do with the way in which our choices, our free choices, also shape our fate in the future. We were talking about this quite late. And then I went to bed, and about 3 in the morning, I woke up with just the absolute most excruciating pain in my lower back. And I thought, my appendix had burst. But whatever it was, other than breaking my arm pretty badly when I was in college, and compound fracture, and I had some nerve damage, and that was the most physically painful thing I've ever been through. But this pain was second to that. It was the most excruciating pain I'd ever felt. And I managed to roll out of my bed, and I tried to use my hotel room phone to dial the front desk to get help, and the phone was dead. There was no dial tone. I had to crawl and get my cell phone, which was plugged in. I called my wife. I called my mother, my mother-in-law. I called anyone that I could think of in my family, and everyone had their, it's 3 a.m, everyone had their phones turned off. I managed to get myself dressed, though it was absolutely brutal. And somehow I rather than calling 911, which somehow just eluded me, like I forgot that I could just call 911. I thought that I had to go down to the front desk to get them to call 911. It was just like, maybe it was just the pain I was experiencing. Anyway, I got down to the front desk, and I could barely stand, and I was completely delirious. The pain was so bad, and I had trouble telling him my name. I had trouble saying, anything. He ended up calling an ambulance, and he looked at me and he said, "Sir, I think you have a kidney stone." And I remember when he said that, I just thought, oh God, no, because I've heard that these are, the most painful experiences, ever. I've heard it said by women who have had them that it's more painful than the pain of childbirth. It's like, I've seen my wife give birth twice. I don't want any of that, like that was my honest fear. And the gentleman at the front desk then said, it's strange, my daughter was in the hospital last night and she passed 2 kidney stones. That's why I say I think you're passing a kidney stone, because she was just like you. I was like, oh my God. And I couldn't even really react because I was in so much pain. But then the ambulance came, and they got me in the ambulance, and they took me in, and I could barely even answer any of their questions. I was in so much pain, and got to the emergency room, and they did some tests, and they found a kidney stone. Sure enough, very, very small, not big enough to warrant any kind of procedure or breaking it up with sound or laser, or all options were gone because it was not big enough. So the only option were pain meds, anti-nausea medicine, and basically waiting it out until I passed the stone. So I was in the ER all the way until about 7 a.m, about 4 hours or so, in what I would describe as the most painful experience of my life, except for breaking my arm. And first of all, I will say that there were many very beautiful and very profound realizations that came through that experience. So it wasn't just bad, but I have to be like, I was also at one point literally muttering about the astrology while I was on the emergency room table, and there's like people in the room. I was like, oh, isn't this funny, because I'm a Cancer sun, and Saturn and Pluto are opposing my sun right now in Capricorn. And I was like, I kept saying, like muttering, I said, I'm giving birth to a rock. I said, and I thought, how many times in sessions with people have I talked about Saturn opposite the sun as a time of creative crystallization? I was like, screw that. this is so painful. I can't, but I was like muttering on and on about Saturn and Pluto. And I just given this talk, which some of you probably listened to, about Saturn and Pluto and necessity and constraint and transformation. And that we're facing that right now. Well, there it was. And I might have mentioned, you may have heard me also here, that the lunar eclipse this year falls on my birthday. And I was born with the moon in Capricorn, opposite the sun in Cancer. I was born under a lunar eclipse. And so it was 3-4 hours in that emergency room of intense pain, and also just very deep and vivid connection with Saturn and Pluto. And I thought about it, and I thought about it from a lot of different angles. So I wanted to share some of those insights today, for whatever they're worth. Maybe they'll help you process some of this for yourself. But one of the first things that came up for me was I was born with Saturn in the 6th house, exalted with Jupiter in the 6th house. So I've always been, a pretty disciplined person, someone who's, whether it's been competitive swimming or academics or, whatever, I've always been very focused and disciplined on whatever I put my mind to. But sometimes to the extent, sometimes going too far, being like a workaholic. And that's my own vice, there's few things in my life that I really love as much as creative content, like making cool creative stuff and sharing it with people. Brings me a lot of joy, and of teaching people about astrology. There's other things that in my life have created a lot more exhaustion, especially since having kids. One of them is the closing. One of them is our yoga studio, which my wife and I decided to close last week. And I told her, when she was asking my opinion about closing it, that I felt like it was adding that into my astrological work, which brings me a lot of joy and does not feel very taxing for me. That adding in managing the studio and kids was felt like it was taking a toll on my body and my mind, slowly eating away at me. And that I was also fostering not the healthiest patterns in my life in different areas, as a way of compensating for the stress of having to try to manage the yoga studio while being a full-time astrologer and, parent and everything. And so it's, to me, incredibly synchronistic that as I'm sitting there writhing in pain, that in order to turn this page in my life, which has so much been about not trying to work as much and trying to ease back and create a little bit more space and a little bit more flow in my life, that at the threshold of the decision that we made to close the studio last week, which it won't close till the end of September, but we made the decision to close it last week, that I would be literally giving birth to a rock. That I would literally have to process a stone through my body. So that was this beautiful, just meditating on a stone passing through a passageway that's too small, too narrow, for the stone, and that it creates pain, was this beautiful object lesson, a kind of karmic culmination of a season in my life that's been about very grueling and exhausting work, 60 to 70 hours a week for 5 years now. And that it's been about trying to close that chapter. As Saturn and Pluto have opposed my own sun, I've been trying to close that chapter and focus more on having quality time to do the creative work like this that I really love to do, and my astrology work. So it was this beautiful first, expression of the Saturn-Pluto opposition to my natal sun, and I kept thinking about just birthing a rock. And it's not pretty. It's kind of embarrassing, to talk about birthing a rock. That my work led to the development of a rock in my body, and that my body is too soft and not meant to process rocks. You know what I mean? and that I don't want my body to become like a rock. Those were, and you know, the funny thing is we own a yoga studio, right? I've been, been doing and teaching yoga for 10 years. And here's this message about how even yoga, when you do yoga in the wrong way, can become hardening. It can harden your heart and harden your body more than it sometimes opens it or softens it. So these were very deep realizations that I was having. And the other thing that kept coming up for me was how fragile life is. Think how soft and vulnerable life is. And I could feel how vulnerable I am in my physical mortal frame. And I kept thinking, most of us leave our bodies in ways that constitute something of a crisis. Very few of us leave real peacefully, you know? And I thought, again, like I did recently, I did a post not long ago about having a kind of out-of-body near-death dream experience. And just like that experience, I also had this realization that it really matters that we die well, and that we die with as much peace as possible, and that we don't devote nearly enough time to thinking about how my life is about a conscious direction that I'm taking beyond the last breath that I'm here for. And so our plans don't extend far enough into the future. We don't think about a 100-year, or we don't think about a 500-year plan or a 1,000-year plan for our spiritual health or happiness. And I was thinking about that a lot. I was thinking about the moon in Capricorn in my own chart too, right? Sometimes it's just the schedule and the grind and the work and the goals. Eventually they make you hard. They harden you, and they don't keep your soft animal body present and open to each and every moment and every experience. So I kept feeling that, because the pain was so acute that there was nowhere to go but the present moment. Pain is very clarifying in that sense. And I had this interesting image of Saturn opposite the sun as the pain that clarifies. The pain is sometimes an ally for presence. So at any rate, I got back to the hotel room in the morning after my pain subsided, and I thought that maybe the stone had passed, because they said once it dropped into my bladder, it was so small that I probably wouldn't even feel it going out, but it was big enough to cause a huge amount of pain. And so I didn't feel any pain anymore, and I thought it must have passed. And I hadn't gotten any sleep all night, and I'd just been through this crazy experience. But I thought, I'm going to come back here to the conference and teach my class, because I didn't come all of this way, you know, and I'm feeling okay for the moment. So I'll just teach the class and then I'll go and rest. So I taught the class, and then after, at the very end of the class, however, the pain started coming back really strongly. So thankfully, my mother, who lives not far from Ann Arbor, Michigan, by that time she took off work and came over here. Now, my mom's a nurse practitioner, so a Scorpio sun in the 12th house, worked in intensive care for a long time in her career. So nothing like having your mom around when you're that messed up, but also, you know, my mom's very good in critical situations. She's, and, you know, has that nursing background. So she came and then sat with me for the next 6 to 8 hours as I basically writhed in pain and vomited because the pain was so acute, and cried. And I mean, it was really, really bad. I've never, like I said, never experienced something that painful. And then all of a sudden it was over again. And it's been fine ever since. Last night at about 7 o'clock, the pain subsided, and I haven't had it come back. So it's again possible that I passed it, but they said sometimes it takes, you know, a couple days, a couple weeks sometimes before it'll actually pass all the way out, and it'll come and go. So I don't know if I really have given birth to the rock yet or not. It could still, could still be on its way. I got up this morning, taught another class. So second class was better than the first one, which I was also teaching while coming off from the morphine that they had given me. So it's, hard to say how good the first class went. Everyone seemed to like it, but at any rate, so that's been my conference experience. And it came on, the symptoms of that, by the way, that I'm talking about here, the kidney stone, they first started developing in very small ways that I started noticing right as Mars was opposite Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. Mars in Cancer, Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. So if you've been following what I've been saying about Saturn and Pluto lately, then this story I feel like is a very good illustration of it. And my hope in you hearing all of this, sorry to be long-winded, my hope in you hearing all of this is that you might be inspired, and also that you may come to understand Saturn and Pluto at a deeper level. The physical things that manifest under a transit are teachers, right? So in this case, the literal crystallization of something hard at moving through the softness of the body, making me more aware of how soft the body is in a way that I easily forget about when I work so hard that I treat my body like it's just a hunk of meat, What a beautiful lesson. How amazing that the universe could use pain alongside of the insights of astrology to teach me how to be kinder to myself. So now my wife's an herbalist, my mom's a nurse, so I ask you please not to pour in a lot of health advice. I have plenty right now coming at me from all directions, and I'm a vegetarian, I don't drink, I'm very healthy as things go. So there's a couple of possibilities within vegetarian diets that can sometimes lead to the development of stones. So I've been looking into some of that and trying to do whatever I can to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I think the main thing that I learned from all of this, even more so than the physiological aspect, was being gentler with ourselves, with myself. So okay, so that story aside, living astrology. I want to talk now about the planetary transits for the month of July. So I'm going to put them up on the screen so that you can see them, and we're going to go into each one. Now, I've given you so much on Saturn and Pluto recently that I'll try not to, overkill here. But there is a lot of Saturn and Pluto coming up in the month ahead. So let's just see what that looks like. Well, the first thing that's happening at the very start of the month, and I've organized this pretty simply, is a new moon solar eclipse in the sign of Cancer. And that is a powerful moment. And first of all, it points to sorry guys, hold on just a second. First of all, it points, here's the solar eclipse. Solar eclipses are like mega new beginnings, right? So you're looking at a very powerful new beginning. Cardinal signs like Cancer initiate, or they represent turning points where something does a 180. So you got to think about this as a turning point, as a new beginning, as the initiation of something. Now with Cancer, it's often going to pertain to very lunar significations: family, home, parents, the past, ancestral karma, your living situation, property, things like that. Now it also has to do with the body. The moon is related to women, mothers, children, the body, and even the environment and nature to a certain extent. And there's the need with a Cancerian eclipse to make a change in our life so that we are fostering healthy, compassionate, and sensitive emotional maturity in our lives. Where can we grow and evolve emotionally and cultivating deeper and healthier emotional bonds in our life. Now, that eclipse again starts off the month right away. It's just right out the gate, big eclipse on July 2nd. Now, from there, the next big event of the month that's really quite pivotal is between July 8th and 9th. During that time, Mercury is going to conjoin Mars, and Mercury is going to turn retrograde while both are in a square to Uranus. That's a huge dynamic as well. First of all, Mercury-Mars, when it's stationing together, can really indicate that the ego, the mind, and speech are in a very temperamental and potentially volatile place. There can be a lot of issues around bullying or domineering attitudes, or trying to force yourself on something or someone else with rhetoric or speech, or being really assertive, cutting with your words. Got to be careful of that, all of us. The ego can get overly protective, overly rigid, overly defensive, and basically can just if we feel slighted personally at all, we might have kind of a blow up and overcompensate in some way, and overreact. The other thing you have to be careful for here is about, executive, strong, willful decisions, and they might be about breaking or turning or changing or challenging some previously agreed upon contract or negotiation or promise. So I break the promise, I break the contract, I cut off the relationship, or I make a choice or a decision, some kind of executive choice that's really rash and impulsive, and that may end up leading into a very difficult situation. So you have to be very careful about that. Proclamations that are too strong, arrogant, hot-headed. We also have to be careful of the desire to fight or defend the ego, to get into ego battles and power struggles. Okay, well, add into the mix the square to Uranus, and you also have this feeling of it's very unpredictable. It has a very erratic feeling behind it. Uranus brings in that which is erratic, unpredictable, rebellious, and with Mars involved, Mars-Uranus, not great. You have to got to generally watch out for accidents, injuries, blow-ups, violence that's sort of random and sudden. This is also the potential for some kind of car or transit breakdown, issues with flights, with automobiles, with trains. And then you also have issues around technology potentially breaking down. Mercury stationing, turning retrograde, hitting malefic Mars and erratic Uranus, some kind of breakdown in technology, in wiring, electricity. Got to be careful of that kind of stuff. But think about that also in terms of your nervous system, the potential to drain or tax your nervous system, or to just overload yourself in some way. So that's a real possibility here as well. Now, the other thing that can come to mind here is this feeling of needing to protect, defend, or advocate for something. And Uranus you throw in Uranus, and Uranus has this effect of this kind of avant-garde or revolutionary qualities. So there might be innovative or interesting ideas that are outside of the box, new experiments, new technology, or expressing yourself in a particularly powerful, dynamic, or eccentric manner. But also one that might be quite forceful and strong, provocative, intentionally meant to disturb or disrupt or challenge authority or tradition. So that could also be in the air. Now that's a big deal, right? That's a Mercury retrograde with Mars in square to Uranus. Like that's pretty epic. It's helpful that Jupiter is in a whole sign trine from Sagittarius, because this means that there is a connection to the planet of good fortune and positive outcomes. So I don't think this ends up being super disastrous. I mean, it could, but I think there's might be a silver lining in there that sort of protects us from worst case scenarios. Anyway, let's go on. So between July 10th and the 15th, you're going to see the sun moving through an opposition with Saturn and then Pluto. So be careful of giving birth to rocks. But otherwise, generally speaking, you've got a time of, like I said earlier, the phrase creative crystallization comes to mind. The idea of laboring with something that's tough, hard, exhausting, difficult, feels like an obstacle. In order to work through it, it might be painful because the sun in Cancer is more vulnerable. It's more sensitive. It's sweeter. And so, yeah, this might be a time of dealing with some real challenges around, dealing with challenges around family, around the masculine and feminine within ourselves, and the sweetness and softness versus the hardness and discipline, setting appropriate boundaries in your life, and clarifying what's necessary and what isn't, making sure that you're not exhausting yourself emotionally or draining yourself because of too much work. These are all things that are going to be coming up. The other thing, of course, that comes to my mind is that the sun opposite Saturn and Pluto is also potentially very challenging for the topic of fathers or leaders or people who have some leadership position. This can be about the death or loss of fathers or challenges related to father figures. This can be about crucibles that we go through as fathers, for those of us who are literal fathers, challenging times of being a dad. It can also pertain to family karma that's pretty deep, and that's because, again, the sun is in the sign of the moon in Cancer. So a deep transformational sequence here that's culminating, by the way, on July 16th when we get to a lunar eclipse. And let me point that out for you. So we get to July 16th and we've got a lunar eclipse in Capricorn, which is always lunar eclipse, you can tell, because it's going to be opposite the sun, and it's conjoined with Pluto, right? So lunar eclipses close doors, they close windows, they mark a moment of completion or ending, as well as culmination, something reaching its peak and something finalizing or ending. And so this is an intensely transformational moment. It's very Plutonian, and it will feel to us probably in some ways inevitable, necessary, hard, just, like the fate that I've been looking at this Saturn-Pluto opposition to my sun for years, wondering what would happen and wondering how free I was to determine it or not. Well, I made my choices, right? And now in some ways I had to live with the consequences in my health situation over the past few days. So the Saturn-Pluto opposition to the sun for many of us is going to be about inevitabilities, the hard stuff we have to face, the fated stuff that comes from the past and past choices that we've made, and that may also serve to remind us we need to make some changes so that we can live in a softer, sweeter place in general. So that lunar eclipse, very powerful, brings necessity, fate, transformation, contraction, certain kind of hardness that's there. But can we meet it with softness, grace, wisdom, kindness, gentleness, and work through it? That'll be the question. Now, between the 17th and the 21st, Venus will be then working through oppositions to both Saturn and Pluto. The same exploration of fate, necessity, obstacles, contractive moments, difficulties, the topics of growing up, becoming more mature, hard lessons, specifically in relation to romantic partnerships, marriage, friendships, the topic of women in our life or sexuality, even fertility. those things, those topics are going to become a part of the conversation. So you're thinking about hard separations, losses, divorces, challenges in love and relationships, or you're thinking of, you know, deeper, more fated encounters with friends or loved ones, or also the need to grow or evolve in our physical intimacy. And, you know, are we creating enough room or space in our life for meaningful, physically connected relationships with people? That's what Venus in Cancer likes. Opposite Saturn and Pluto, you know, what are the boundaries or barriers keeping us from deeper connectivity with others? So these kinds of things will come up really strongly when Venus then gets in on the action between the 21st or 17th and the 21st. Now, the last transit that I have marked down as a big one, and there's others, but these are the big ones on my list this month, is there's another new moon coming through on July 31st. This new moon features, it's a new moon in Leo, and it features a conjunction with Venus and, again, a simultaneous square to Uranus. So what can we expect from that? Well, you know, the thing that's so interesting about the new moon with Venus square to Uranus and Taurus is that Uranus and Taurus is Venus's sign, which means we're talking about revolutions in relation to Venusian things. We're going to ask questions about being true to ourselves and whether or not the truth of our heart has room in the relationships that we're currently in. Do our friends honor and recognize our true selves? Do our lovers identify and understand what is really special about us? These questions will be really important. The need to individuate within the context of relationships. When two people are with each other for a long time, sometimes, you know, it's hard to foster each other's individual life if it feels like it's going to become a threat to our bond. But Uranus Venus will demand for more independence, more freedom, more experimentation within the context of relationships. Sometimes if you're single, that can play out in terms of, you know, a fun streak of dating, or, you know, kind of adventures in love or whatever, dating someone that's unusual or that you wouldn't normally date. But it can also lead to you know, kind of disruptions or unexpected events in love that serve to help each person become a little bit more independent, especially if there's codependency that's unhealthy. It can also mean that the new moon cycle ahead, that what we're seeing is an emphasis on creative collaboration. Venus represents harmony, and the Venus new moon with Uranus square brings to mind the idea of starting something to harmonize with others, but doing something that's also kind of different or outside the norms, Uranus. So that's also possible. Finally, the last thing we could say about this new moon square to Uranus is that there may be, in general, a sense of an unexpected development happening in our life that plants a new seed, a seed of change that, you know, will play out over the next few months, and that really is riding on the waves of the eclipse. Probably it would have to do with recognizing, again, your individual essence. That's a very Leonic solar kind of thing at a deeper level, while also recognizing that some things, structures, relationships may really need to change in your life so that you can step forward creatively a bit more. Okay, so that's kind of a summary of the month ahead of July. I hope that this has been interesting for you. I debated as to whether or not to share the story, but it ended up I ended up sort of sharing the story with the classroom of students that we had here as a way of, you know, talking about astrology, and I thought I'd share it here too. The one last thing that I want to say about this experience is that life is really precious, and I think one of the things that I came to realize through this experience, which I kind of said earlier, is that these Saturn-Pluto dynamics, in many ways, a lot of what we try to do in life, what we struggle with, is we're all in some ways trying to birth rocks. We spend so much of our time worried about the future, working so hard in the present, but then never really arriving anywhere, never really arriving at some sweet, sensitive, peaceful place in the future. I think, well, I just got a few more things to do. I'll get them done, and then I'll be nice to myself, or and then there will be peace, or and then I'll take a rest, or and then I'll start prioritizing my relationships or other things that really are more important than this work or this worry oriented task to-do list that I have. But then we never get there, do we? Right? And so in that sense, what is the result of our creative work? Slowly, whether we realize it or not, we're passing these hardnesses, these hard rocks. We're passing them through the soft, beautiful terrain of our existence. And the pain does gradually catch up with us, at which point the pain can bring us back to the present, and we can realize that now is always the best time to stay in the soft heart. Now is always the best time to be good to ourselves. Now is always the best time to have compassion. Or, we can ride this out all the way to find out that, rather than being midwives of spiritual growth, we have given birth only to a hard heart. And for me, this couldn't have come at a better time. One of the things my wife and I said when we were issuing the letter last week to everyone that we're closing our yoga studio was that yoga has never been more important to me right at the moment where I realized that trying to be a full-time astrologer plus running a yoga studio is kind of killing me. I don't have time for actual yoga. So getting back to that is something that, as I'm getting back to that, this karma that I'm faced with right now, that I was faced with over the past few days, makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm very thankful for the experience. And I wonder sometimes if we can dare to be really deeply thankful for the hard lessons in life. Because when we open ourselves up to them, it's a medicine, and we start to remember more frequently the need to stay present and soft and vulnerable and open, which brings us closer to the soul and to the source of the soul. So that's what I've got for you guys. I will be doing some 5-minute overviews for the sun and rising signs in the next couple of days and posting them, so you can stay tuned for those. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I look forward to catching up with you guys again next week. Take care. Bye.